breakfast puppies?
This podcast contains adult language and content and is meant for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
That's right. You're listening. The Glitterbois.
So of all the books that we have done so far on this show, I think this one it's in the top echelon so far.
It is in the top echelon, and it is also seemingly the hardest one we've had to schedule.
Yeah, well...
Is this our third or fourth run at it?
I want to say this is our third attempt to get a recording schedule on the book. But hey, here we are. We're back. We're talking words at microphones and at each other.
Yes, very much so.
And I've even hit the record button.
Are you sure?
Yes, I am.
Because as much as I love this book that we're about to talk about, I may jump off a bridge if I have to read it again this year.
I mean, honestly, I don't think I would jump off a bridge. It's a good book. I enjoyed rereading it. I actually, while rereading this book, I loaded up my PDF this time, and I just highlighted. I started highlighting away because... every other paragraph, if not every paragraph, at least in the first half of the book, it's just one campaign inspiration after another, just either as a throwaway line or as an event described in the recent past. It's just bam, 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 just hits you with things that you can throw at your adventurers.
So what book are we talking about anyway?
We are talking about the Palladium Nightbane campaign setting, Book 2, Nightlands.
Ooh.
Now, dear listener, you probably have very recently listened to the previous discussion on the Nightbane world books, where we talked about Between the Shadows, which is another goddamn amazing book.
Yes.
This book just carries that amazing forward, and honestly, if you don't have Between the Shadows, you'll probably need to get it because there's a lot of callbacks to it here.
Now, remind me, was Between the Shadows also a C.J. Carella book or not?
It was.
Okay.
Yep. CJ is just hammering these awesome books out in this time. Oh, where's that date? When did this come out? 1996.
1996. Yep. So one thing I'll say right off the bat, one of my favorite Palladium books, period, regardless of system, one of my favorite Nightbane books, probably one of my least favorite covers.
It's weak, actually. Yeah.
I will say it does do a good job of kind of capturing the feel of the Nightlands.
Yeah.
But compared to the banger covers that came out of the Nightbane line, this is not as strong. I wouldn't say it's weak, it's just not as strong.
I would say it's weak in comparison to the material that is behind this cover. So this is a John Zalesnik cover, and I got a love-hate relationship with his art. I find his art is very mechanically good. It is he has clean lines. He has very well-defined shapes. He has very clean, smooth art. There's just never much going on in it to keep you looking at it.
Yeah. Strong contrast is another thing that I think of when I think of his art.
Yeah. That's my one thing. I feel that these covers so far have been banger.
Oh, yeah.
And now we've got something that is just kind of uninspired. Just kind of, yeah. Sorry, John, if you're listening, you got some good stuff, but this one, don't think it should have been the cover of this awesome book.
That said, interior art, we have Ramon Perez Jr., Scott Johnson, Roger Peterson, Martin McKenna's back, Dave Carson, Brandon C. Clark, Mark Dudley, Matthew. I'm thinking his last name is pronounced Rogski.
Okay.
But
Rogski.
I'm not entirely positive. And then Ka Xiong.
Yep.
The interior art is super, super solid.
Oh man, yeah. This is I feel one of those Ramon Perez shines once again. Like it's really good. I think that first actual picture on page 6, Brog, I think that's Matthew. I'm guessing because he's the only one who has an ROG in his name. His stuff is always on point.
Oh yeah, the stippled artwork style. I love it.
It's very reminiscent. Well, I wouldn't say reminiscent, but it shares that same zone of awesome as RK Post's work, I think. Yeah. This book is cover average cover aside. This book is full of awesome artwork. So anyway, what is this book? This book, as described on the cover, is about the Nightlands, which is the let's just call it a parallel dark Earth.
Yes.
An Earth-like parallel space that, if you've seen the show Stranger Things, it's the Upside Down.
It's the shadowed looking glass.
Yeah. It is the pale, dark, kind of spooky, evil, sinister mirror. Actually, mirror is a better term here, because mirrors come in very heavily in the Nightbane system and lexicon. Okay, so we open up with what I think is a pretty good set of journals here. Well written. I was captivated by the story. It has its ups and its downs and its turns, and I love the way it ends. It's just closes out with one line that you're like, okay, yep, that's
Yep.
It feels like someone was actually writing a journal to themselves and not telling a story designed to look like a journal, you know?
And I love any journal entry that doesn't end with, oh God, they're coming through the door.
Or dash or trailing thing. You're like, you were seriously just sitting there writing the whole time? Man, okay, side note, that is so common in video games, especially survival horror video games, where you'll come across these logs. Now, they may have been like a voice message that someone left, and but more often they are like a text message, something that somebody wrote or typed up. But then you're like, at first you hear them spoken, or you read the text and you're like, okay, this is really evoking the setting, until you stop and think about it for just 5 seconds. Did they really just do that? Like who would stop? Oh shit, I'm being stabbed in the face right now. I need to write a note about it. Yeah. Like, who does this?
It's a trope that came up in the late 1920s, 30s pulp era with some echoes back to Gothic literature. And it can be a powerful tool, but I think gratuitous overuse has lost it a lot of its effectiveness.
It's just one of those things that's such a trope that you're so used to seeing that you tend to not think about it until you do think about it, and suddenly it all falls apart like glass shattering. Yeah. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm glad this wasn't one of those journals. Oh no, they're coming for us.
But anyways, once you get past the journals,
actually, no, I'm going to stick with this topic for a moment.
Okay.
Because you guys just experienced that whole weekend-long extended run through the Lord of the Rings movies.
Yes.
Okay. There's a scene, Mines of Moria.
Yep.
Where they go in.
Yep.
And they find the note written in a book.
Yep.
About how Balin, or was it Balin? Cousin Balin just fell.
Yep.
Okay. And the orcs are coming and they're here.
Yep.
Who put him in the fucking tomb?
Okay. So
if they all died right there,
okay,
who built that tomb?
For the record, you brought up this tangent.
Okay.
And the framing of the movie doesn't do a good job on this. But Balin fell earlier during the siege of Moria.
Okay.
Which is why he had a tomb. And I don't have my genius level Tolkien geek spouse here, who's probably, when they listen to this, going to scream at me. But I think the tomb was actually supposed to be for somebody else originally. I believe it's mentioned in one of the Lost Tales.
Okay.
That it was a kingly tomb for like a relative of Balin's who had fallen during the just before the siege, and his body was lost during the siege, and they stuck Balin in this kingly tomb, just fitting his stature.
Gotcha.
So yeah,
okay, that would make sense then. I just remember I was not with you all, but I did watch the movies, or at least one or two of them, or bits of them over the weekend as well. And I remember watching that point thinking, wait a second, they made a last stand in this room, and this is implied to be where the king died.
Right.
Did they just like stop in the middle of a fight and build a tomb and put him in it? And then, okay, now we can continue.
The first time I watched the movie, I thought the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And it was like after maybe the third or fourth time I watched it that I finally dove for the books and started looking it up and doing some work on it. He fell earlier.
Okay.
And if you think about it, it's a great room to do a final stand in.
A tomb. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and what a way to go, like in a tomb. Like,
defending the honor of your lord, the whole bit. I mean, if you're in that culture, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Speaking of tombs,
the Nightlands.
The Nightlands.
There's a lot of death in the Nightlands, yes. Yes. So this is some cool ass shit. It's what I gotta say. We start off with that little, getting the reader into the mood, reading through the journal of a visitor from what was it, the 1800s?
Yes.
Yeah, late 1800s, who was still there in the early 1900s, and then we get a actual written to the reader from the author description of what the Nightlands are, where they come through, what their history is, where the Night Lords came from, etc.
With references in there dating back to the Nightlands having been a present reflection of the world dating back to, I think the earliest account I noticed about was 40 BC.
If not earlier. So one thing that I like that it does here is it's vague on a lot of those things.
Right.
It takes this approach as it's letting the game master decide for themselves how they want to time things in the past. And it's even letting the game master ultimately decide what is the true nature of the Nightlands. But it gives a lot of options here. The most prevalent being the Nightlands as a dark mirror of Earth. But that may or may not be true. It could only have happened because of these bad guys who came over from Earth, or maybe it's always been that way. It's very vague on that, so it lets the game master make their own decision, which is something I think Palladium is always very good at.
I do like how much effort is put in this book on talking about what the implications for the Nightlands are in the real world. Everything from discussing how Spook Squad and the Nightbane Resistance, despite the fact not agreeing on anything, both are in 100% agreement that the Nightlands needs to be basically shut down.
Yeah.
To the point where there's actually some tangential references of limited cooperation on that front. And so,
Yeah, well, again, something that Nightbane, I think, does best of all the Palladium properties is it gives you multiple interesting and realistic, understandable factions that all have their goals and their members and their personalities. And at every opportunity that it introduces something new, it also tells you what those factions not only think about this new thing, and not only what that new thing might think about those factions, but oftentimes it even goes into what those factions think about the other factions thinking about this new thing. It is wonderful, this web of connection.
Should we talk about King Moloch?
Well, let's talk about him in a second. Let's build up to this.
Okay.
So a note that I have here, and I went through this book and I kept going back and forth every time I found references to the Middle East, specifically 10 to 20,000 years ago. Now, that is generally there's a lot of overlap of things that might have happened between 10 and 20,000 years ago, including when the Night Lords came over. Supposedly they were from a culture in the area of the Middle East at that time. And the civilizations that may have possibly been hinted at existing before they came over, and bits of lore about how those civilizations fell and these formless ones, right? So, Moloch, if you are a fan of other properties, specifically a pair of authors who existed and were very, very prevalent in the 1930s, Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft, there's a lot of overlap with their stuff, but one of the common mythologies are civilizations that existed at that time. Now, Lovecraft went more towards the eons ago things, but Howard's Conan setting, and before that, the Volusia setting of King Kull implied the existence of about 10 to 15,000 years ago, this kingdom of sorcerers in the Middle Eastern region called Acheron. I get, in my brain, in my headcanon, Moloch was the lead guy of Acheron when it fell.
Which would potentially make sense. I mean, speaking pseudo-historically, because a lot of this is before we have solid written records, and what we do have is secondhand. Moloch, his first written mention that where Moloch is Moloch rather than an interpretation was in Hebrew texts. He was a Canaanite deity.
So you're talking about the real world,
our world.
That's
he was one of the Canaanite deities, according to biblical, and I believe they've found some non-religious Hebraic references to his existence as well, but it's all from the perspective of the Hebrews. So, you have one culture talking about another culture. So there's a lot gets lost in translation, and everybody knows that the Hebrews did not like the Canaanites. So,
yeah, that just got me thinking, like Hebrew and religious text. To the vast majority of people who think of Hebrew, they think of it as religious writing. I wonder how much isn't that has survived.
Well, if you want to go down that tangent, not as much as we have from other sources, surprisingly. The issue is an issue of accessibility. Because to some extent, I'm going to dip my toes in here in a somewhat controversial topic, but to some extent, the practice of the Hebrew language has been consistent for thousands of years. And so what sources we have are still able to be read. With all the challenges of, 3,000 to 4,000 years of translation. It's not like we're dealing with the Egyptian, which we actually have far more, examples of both religious and non-religious text. But because cracking the different periods of Egyptian, which calling it one consistent language is actually not entirely correct, can be challenging. And then you have the whole other sections of Mesopotamian cultures where we have a lot of examples of the writing, but we don't know what it sounds like. In many cases, we have no clue of what it's translating at, what it translates as. So it's an accessibility issue. So the Hebrew texts, both religious and non-religious, are more accessible, even though they're not necessarily as numerous as we have from other sources because of constancy of use.
Makes sense. Thank you. So, Moloch, Hebrew name
for a Canaanite deity. Runs into the whole issue of who the Canaanites actually were. Generally, there's a consensus that it was actually a couple different groups that the Hebrews of the time threw under one banner. But I believe, I might get this one wrong, but Baal, who also appears in this book, also early mention in the Hebrew texts, primarily religious, though I'm not exactly aware of any non-religious reference to him, but also a god of a foreign kingdom that actually did get some worship in Hebrew lands and ended up creating a near civil war over it. So
yeah. The way that this text describes it and inserts their canon connects it to reality, is the Night Lords are all the Baal, and they, well, you know, the name just became synonymous with an evil power. Yeah.
It's almost like, just as the Nightlands are a dark mirror to the real world, all the Night Lords and the avatars of the Night Lords are just shattered fragments of a larger mirror of Baal.
Deep.
Yeah. Well, you know,
there's so many interpretations here that we could look at them as the shattered remnants of a god. Like, there's the dark. So again, and the dark in my brain, further connecting it back to the Howardian texts and stories and the worlds of Acheron and Stygia, the outer dark, which was where, you know, all of the corrupting evil and destructive forces would come from, things that man was not meant to mess with, things that the sorcerers messed with, that they drew their power from, the dark, the outer dark, the lords of night. I mean, it's you can run with this in any direction you want.
Yeah, in so many ways, this book is this wonderful mashup of, and that's not doing it justice, because mashup often has tropes of being weakly done fanfic. And that's not exactly fair to this work. But it's this wonderful mashup of, like, Robert E. Howard, Lovecraft, a couple other authors from that period, and Neil Gaiman.
I see it.
If Neil Gaiman had one hell of a bad MDMA trip.
Yeah. Well, I can see it with Gaiman. For me, again, taking it back to his roots, this is more Barker.
Yeah, like, very much Barker. Yeah.
This setting oozes Clive Barker and Cenobites.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. God, there's so much good stuff to tap here. And while we've talked about some of the historical and mythological references that are pulled in here, I feel like the authors did a good job of really putting their own spin and depth to the characters. It's so easy to one-note Lilith whenever Lilith pops up in a damn game. I want to say this is one of the best portrayals of Lilith I've seen in a book in a long time. Complex, not merely running the scorned woman trope into the ground, or the mother of monsters trope into the ground. Far more complex.
Well, and there's also, and again, to credit for CJ, there's text in her background and in her description that talks about her origin, how she came from a time when women were traded like property and cattle. And in order to take advantage of this whole Night Lords thing, she used the only powers that were available to her in that moment in time. But they aren't her only powers. Like, she has evolved into a very complex character. Okay, I want to talk about some of the aspects of the Night Lords. So the first book gives a very, very brief, kind of vague look at a typical Night Lord's power profile. This goes into individual Night Lords, and what I like is that it gives a vagueness to the game master, where it talks about how many there are. We don't know. Are there dozens? Are there hundreds? There could be thousands. Word's still out. There's no hard and concrete evidence on this. And there's a callback. There's a note in the very beginning where it talks about the Nightlands and stuff, and it straight out says, this is information that experienced Nightbane will know.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they are brand new to the Nightlands. The rest of this is information they will probably know or have heard. And then it presents everything in vagueness. What I love about that is a player can read this.
Yep.
They can look at it. They can see what this Night Lord's all about. But they still won't know because there are layers to each of the plans that are given that they're just... Game Masters, this is a great book to allow you to take the Nightlands and make them your own. All right, I want to talk about Moloch's plans here.
Okay.
This is the page... Sorry. This is the second. Okay, I'm looking back through books and finding all of my highlights. When we go back to the factions, that's where I really started highlighting things. Basically, every other paragraph, I have highlighted a seed of a game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can make a whole campaign based on this one sentence kind of stuff. And there's multiple on every page. They thin out a little bit when we get into the artifacts. We're going to get back to the artifacts in a second, though. But when you get to Moloch's plans, oh my God. Each one of these things that we're talking about what Moloch is doing and why, there's dozens of little throw out lines here. Okay, very, very simple example. Unless the cult can be stopped, hundreds of thousands of people will die at the end of 12 months, followed by hundreds of thousands of more. And this is about poisoned Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
That right there is an entire campaign of infiltrating the Coca-Cola Corporation, figuring out the poison, then working with the Lightbringers and the Guardians, who are also mentioned there, and trying to counteract the poison. Right there, boom, whole campaign. It's wonderful. It's chef's kiss, full of such seed and content.
And of course, it had to be Coca-Cola because we all know Pepsi is poison.
There are a number of those kind of hand wave or wink calls to modern things. Like instead of Coca-Cola, it's Mega Cola, and I think instead of Mickey Mouse, it's like what, Ricky Rat? Yeah.
Oh, Ricky Rat.
There's a lot of fun stuff there. Okay, this is 150 pages of awesome, so we're going to be all over the place.
Yeah, and again, it's so much in just 150 pages. There are, in my opinion, there are far longer Palladium books out there that do not give you as much inspiration, information, usable stuff as this book delivers. It's one of the better ones for that.
Well, let's look at why. Many of the books that we're used to looking at, the most, of course, their biggest franchise, their biggest property, Rifts. A Rifts book comes out, and 30 to 50% of it is just weapons text.
Yep.
Or gear descriptions. And those aren't, there's almost nothing there that can make a campaign or that can create adventures or inspire characters other than looking cool. And a lot of it is, multiple pages of a single NPC stats, which by this point, Palladium still hasn't, in this time, present day, and clearly visible here in Nightbane, they still haven't quite mastered condensing the stats. But what Nightbane does, what this book does, is even in the character stat descriptions are little lines here and there talking about not just their powers, but what they think about those powers. Or, there'll be like a sentence about their enemies and allies that'll just drop a bomb on you. And you're like, wait, what? I can turn this into something. That's 150 pages here, and each page has something cool to work with. Like the Sword Bearer.
Yes. I was hoping you were going to get to that. I want to
run a whole campaign of nothing but sword bearers. This is going to be my exception to the hill that I normally die on with Nightbane. Normally, Nightbane, you should play Nightbanes. Unless you want to play sword bearers. These guys are awesome.
Well, we've had this conversation before, and I don't feel like detracting from this conversation about this book to discuss why you're wrong.
Fair. Yeah, we could talk for a long time about why I'm wrong on that. Okay, here's some things. Swordbearer is a character class that is built basically. They basically have a greater rune weapon from the Nightlands, and that weapon is good. I like that. It's good instead of, you look at classic Palladium rune weapons, which are mostly diabolic evil and want to kill you. So anyway, it's good, and it gives you a lot of power, and that power grows over time. It doesn't have to be a sword. It's just a catch-all term.
Yep.
But little notes here that I like. Many sword bearers turn out to be physically unimpressive individuals, not to mention nerds, loners, and other social misfits. Looking at you, most of our listeners. And then one of my favorite bits here, again, whole campaign right here. This may change after the artifact, talking about the scarcity of them.
Yeah.
This may change after the artifacts in a certain lost city in the Nightlands version of Australia are finally revealed. Anyway, wait, what? So then you flip to the section on the Atlantis Foundation. You're like, holy fucking shit.
Yes.
I need a moment alone with this book. Hold on.
While he's gone, let me just say that much like the real world, Nightlands, Australia is one of the more horrific places you can ever find yourself in.
Yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, so like we're going to flip way ahead to the Australia section, which again presents a new faction. It has its history. It has a very inventive, creative history that I love. I love the characters that are involved in it. I love the fact that nobody in this faction realizes the powerhouse that they are actually sitting on. Mm-hmm. They've got it feels kind of Steve Zissou going on there. And then right after that, we have a whole slew of terrible new creatures, which, in my opinion, the beasts and the creatures in this book are almost required for running a complete Nightbane game. The first book gives you some cool beasts, and the second book gives you some really cool beasts, but this book completes them. Flesh lamprey.
I was gonna say, what's your favorite? And my favorite is the flesh lamprey.
The flesh lamprey. It's so vicious and tiny and just disgusting, and it both gets under your skin as a reader, and it literally gets under your skin as a character. It's again, chef's kiss.
Yeah, that was one where when I read the description, I wanted to find out where CJ was originally from, because I grew up in the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes region. We don't have those cute kind of charming lampreys that the Pacific Northwest does. We have things that look like kielbasa with just a mouthful of razor sharp teeth. and I was like, wow, you got the feel of that down.
Yeah, the flesh lampreys I thought were really cool. The skinners, I love any kind of creature that can animate a corpse that isn't a necromancer, because necromancers are kind of over and done for me. But flesh lampreys.
You heard it here first. NPC is not in favor of recycling.
And the great hounds are really badass. The doppelganger warlord is kind of it's neat. I like them taking the doppelgangers a bit further, but the great hounds are really cool, and the flesh lampreys. That for me is where this book is ultimately at when it comes to evil things that can fuck you up.
Definitely. And so many of these NPCs are so good too. Including the ones that allow hints. Like, we briefly talked about this earlier. Like, Beyond the Supernatural crosses over very easily with Nightbane. Many of the systems cross over very cleanly. One of the ones that I hadn't been thinking about until we got to the NPCs and I hit Wong Chi, leader of the Mystic Tongs. That's a direct call out to Mystic China. And so you can get your demon ass kicking action out of Mystic China and the, folk Taoism mythos fix, and take it to the Nightlands or the other direction. You know, it works real well. You got the same thing: hit points, SDC, horror factor, PPE. It's all there. Many of the powers are referenced across. Most of the skills are swap 1-to-1. The only thing you run into is the inherent problem with anything that is ninjas and super spies related, martial arts, and its challenges with adapting to the rest of the Palladium continuity.
Yeah. Martial arts is fascinating on its own. I can see it being difficult to incorporate in an SDC setting that has supernatural strength characters.
And that's why you need the Mystic China book, because they talk about explicitly that. So, and, you know, and it doesn't hurt to have the Rifts conversion book handy as well for a couple of cases, but you can wing it without it. No problem.
Well, this book actually makes several calls to the Rifts conversion books when it talks about incorporating things like the entities. You know, and one more thing, I'm pretty sure we've done this before, but I want to give Palladium some mad props here. Palladium's take on spirits and vampires are two of the most unique takes that I've seen in gaming on these classic tropes. And I love every time I see them brought up, because they remind me of how different they are, especially if, you know, this is in the 90s. Around the same time we had White Wolf. Completely different style of vampires. I love that they just take it and they own it. And they keep bringing them back, and they don't fall back on overused tropes when it comes to ghosts and vampires. Like they lean hard into the monster vampires and the entities and how alien they are. And it's beautiful.
Very much so. And beyond the Swordbearer, there's also a couple other OCCs here in this book that interest me as well. I have this deep yearning to play a Renegade Shadow Warlock.
Tell me more about this.
So Shadow Warlocks, for those of you who may not remember or who have never looked at the book, are basically humans that were warped by being in the Nightlands. Some are slaves to the forces of the Night Lords. Others are unfortunates who are trying to eke out a living on the edges. But they follow what's called the Path of Shadows. It's a school of thought as much as a mystical tradition. I'm reading from the book a little bit here. Followers of the Shadows believe that Earth and the Nightlands are but two aspects of the same reality, and that to achieve perfection, they must be united as one. It's a philosophical movement. Most of them are actually vehemently opposed to Baal, and they consider the Night Lords, Baal, and by extension, most of the Night Lords, perverters and exploiters of the Nightlands. So the concept of playing a renegade, aka a former enslaved Shadow Warlock, really, really appeals to me. Both their outlook, their powers, the just entire take on a complicated situation is even more complicated than most people think. You know, I really like their feel.
Let's make this even more complicated. Shadows? Aspects of another world? Could these perhaps be from Amber?
Nice call. Nice call. I hadn't thought about that one. Good call.
Huh? Oh, man. What if the Princess of Amber are simply their shadow forms in this world are the Night Lords? Oh, my God. And then, what Eric Wujik? The web connects back to each. It's beautiful. I love the Megaverse.
So many of the other OCCs in here are just absolutely bangers. Hell Riders are just amazing. take the Nightlands and give them biker gangs. That's literally.
Outrider is a good example of a mid-tier fun class.
Yeah.
Like they don't get a shitload of anything. They don't get any powers.
Nope.
No, they get some mild bonuses to their stats and SDC, but they're fun.
Mm-hmm.
They have motorcycles. Their leader is Attila the fucking Hun, and this is Mad Max. Mad Max in the Nightlands.
and then if you want to kick it up a notch with someone who is, again, it's another one where they're calling out specifically Mystic China again. It's an optional OCC. I would be very careful about introducing it into a game unless you really grok what they're going for with it. The Geomantic Immortals.
That was the one spot of the book that I was kind of like not feeling it. Felt kind of like we got this extra text over here that we need to put in a book. Let's slide it in. It's cool, but I didn't get a Nightlands feel with these guys.
Yeah, it is, and I can see where you're coming from there. I think it was another place to, if you've read the Mystic China book, there's some distinct call-outs in the Mystic China book that echo the Nightlands, even though I believe Mystic China came out before Nightbane was even a glimmer in anybody's eye. I'd have to check publication dates for that for sure. But somebody did a crossover, took a existing OCC that exists in that book, Nightbaned it up, and also went, and what if we gave them a dose of Leyline Walker?
And had Ramon Perez draw an awesome picture.
Awesome picture.
There we go. Yep. And we got demons, we got devils. They are way more interesting than any demons and devils I've seen published in Palladium up to this date. They have factions within factions. They have individuals who have goals and are. It's beautiful. I don't want to spoil too much here because I think game masters who are into Nightbane should get this book, read it over, and you know what? When you're done, let your players read it, and then fuck with their expectations in one of the most amazing alternate universe campaigns you'll ever run.
So let's close this out. NPC. Now that you've read through the Nightbane book, the Nightlands book again, what do you want to do with this book?
Let me find my notes. I got notes. I got all kinds of notes here. Okay, things I want to do. I want to go to Mutalan. I love the Mutalan little microcosm because it's like this meld of, I want to say reality, but meld of the Nightlands with astral space. It bridges these two books together wonderfully. And I want to insert some emperor crabs. I love the emperor crabs as creatures, but I also love the little note here that in the kingdom of Mutalan, several emperor crabs have become valuable citizens and work with their fellow sentient beings. But this is unusual. I want to know why. I want to know why this emperor crab is hanging out with these people. That's one thing I want to do. I want to see more flesh lampreys murder people. And I think the biggest note here that I have of awesome adventures that I want to have, there's one at the very beginning that talks about the resistance going through this epic. It's like a couple of sentences about the resistance going through this epic thing to bomb a town and kill a couple of night lords, but then they get in this fight and there's only these survivors. I'm like, I want to play that out. And I want to play out let's just call it the explosion of the Atlantis Foundation and their city. After they discover what it is they're actually sitting on. Each one of these NPCs has this little note, like on one of the words, Daniel, the only thing that concerns him are the strange dreams he's been having about a golden helmet found in the ruins, and the voice he thinks he hears from a sword of black metal. Each one of the NPCs in this organization has a little line somewhere about a piece of gear that's talking to him. And I'm like, oh my God, this is Nightlands Voltron.
That has such Elric vibes to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I want to do with this is possibly a little bit more extreme.
Okay.
Slightly, not necessarily filing off the serial numbers, but definitely defacing them a bit. Nightlands meets Palladium Fantasy with the Nightlands invading Palladium Fantasy. When we decided this was originally the next one on deck, going back like 5 damn months ago, I got like a quarter way through the book and had to pick up my tablet and start making notes of a campaign that's entirely the Nightlands, teched down a bit to like an earlier version of the Nightlands, or you could say the Nightlands of Palladium Fantasy invading the fantasy world. And I think there's just, because like you'll have to do very little conversion. Horror factor wasn't really a thing, but it's relatively easy to retrofit. The SDC isn't inappropriately out of line for a lot of stuff. You will have to do equipment swaps and skill swaps for some of your NPCs, but that's pretty straightforward. And honestly, your average character out of Palladium Fantasy isn't necessarily any worse off than your average unpowered Nightbane character is in the Nightlands, relatively speaking.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think, honestly, mechanically, the numbers line up for Nightbane and Palladium Fantasy 2nd Edition.
I did a little checking. There's a bit of there is a bit of SDC inflation, but that's A, relatively
easy to deal with.
Deal with, and B, actually kind of appropriate for a setting where the Nightlands are invading Palladium Fantasy.
Yeah. I admit it's been a while since I've really dived into 2nd Ed, but I would be very fascinated to see in play the introduction of one single hound. The weakest, they're not really the weakest, but they are the foot soldier. They are the expendable, the mass unit of the Night Lord's armies, of the hounds. One single hound against a group of Palladium adventurers. Because on paper, you look at the numbers and you see the hound, you're like, okay, they're kind of tough. They got some AR. They're not that tough. And then you notice supernatural strength. And then you look at the table and the stats of the core book and see what supernatural strength does in an SDC setting. You realize that this guy's doing anywhere from 20 to 80 points of damage per hit. And he's just throwing people around. Like, he could do a 3-point land in the middle of a group of Palladium and just like blow them out of the moon. Like, it's kind of intense when you realize what numbers that they're throwing around here do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's my take on it. That's where my mind originally went to for as far as my GM brain went. Other than that, like I mentioned, playing a Shadow Warlock is I want to do that. Which for some people will find surprising. They'd think, Jacob, why are you not going for a Hell Rider? But it's I like the philosophy, the take. It's in depth and kind of like a third way of approaching the philosophy that kind of underlies Nightbane as a system. So,
well, I have a proto campaign written for Nightbane that is modern day. It's not fantasy, but I could easily adapt it. Oh, and then have Palladium Fantasy characters become Nightbanes. Oh my God!
I wasn't going to mention this just because some of the players I'm thinking of recruiting to this project listen to the show.
Like, what if your character is a bear man who then has a Morphus That's the multi-bear.
You are a bear with bears for arms.
Oh God. Okay, this has to happen.
Brandon, you're not allowed to go nuts.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's close this out. This is an awesome book.
This is an awesome book. In my opinion, if you're getting into Nightbane, this is a must-have. You get your core book. I would strongly encourage you to get through the
Between the Shadows.
Yeah. But this is a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
This one has to happen.
I would say that this book is crucial. It is, if we're going with a trilogy of books with, Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual, Palladium books don't really fall into those categories. But if we're going to go with a trilogy, we get the Nightbane book, and then I'm going to put this book as number 2. You need the Nightlands book number 2, but then you really want the Between the Shadows to glue the two together.
Yeah. It saves you doing a ton of mental work to gel them together. And again, talk about like this. This is my last thought, I swear. There is this uncommon thoughtfulness, the Nightbane book series, where there is this inherent, what we said in the last book inherently leads to the next book, and the next book foreshadows the stuff in the book after. It's far more contiguous than many other lines in the Palladium universe.
It's also one thing that a lot of Palladium fans, myself included, and I say this lovingly, fans, have as an observation, is that with things like rifts, especially, content will come out later that seems to negate content that came out before, or that seems to counter it or invalidate it, or, everything that was said there, that was a lie, blah, blah, blah. This doesn't do that. It takes upon the existing content and expands it in a way that you want an expansion to do.
Right.
I want to say that I think that of all the things from the first book that shined the most carried forward into this book are, I almost said pawns because I've been playing Dragon's Dogma, are the doppelgangers. The doppelgangers get mentioned so much in here and are given so much more detail. And that detail doesn't really contradict anything in the first book, but all of the cases that are mentioned here of doppelgangers being freed from the Nightlands and becoming people unto themselves and in the world, or very interesting characters from the real world dying. And in that moment of death, the doppelganger in the Nightlands experiences its own becoming, very similar to the Nightbane, but instead of becoming a monster, they either inherit the power of that person's memories and or abilities. And then they take them and either carry forward, or maybe it drives them nuts. It's the doppelgangers get so much more screen time in a book that is largely about the Night Lords.
Yeah, I'll save this for a conversation between you and I, but I've run Nightbane a little bit, not as much as you have, but a little bit. And I used the potentiality of a doppelganger. And you shouldn't pass over what you can do with that entire concept. It allows for some interesting ideas.
Yeah, it does. And some GMs might be tempted to just go the way of the Cylon with it, or werewolf or vampire, or, it's 81 of us could be the bad guy, whatever. But there's so much role-playing growth that comes with being possibly someone who isn't the person you thought you were born to be.
Okay, I will bring it up just because you went there. One of my player oh shit moments that is one of the things about me is I always appreciate it when players bring up things I did to their characters years and years later and curse my name for it. Character their backstory was their wife died before they became a Nightbane.
Okay.
They took a trip to the Nightlands and met the doppelganger who had gained potentiality when his wife died.
Fuck.
So, again, Jacob's an asshole.
I mean, that gives me a little emotional just thinking about it. Fuck.
Especially when two of the PCs, including the character whose wife this was, had been getting a relationship going, and you're suddenly in the Nightlands and you've just met your deceased wife who has full memory of your life together.
Mm-hmm. Credits. Well, Jacob's an asshole.
Yes.
And I've never actually played a game with you, so as a GM. So one day I will.
Yeah. You know, I'm a little rough around the edges. What can I say?
Mm-hmm. Well, we've talked for almost an hour on this book.
Yeah, but it's a book that it deserves an hour.
Yeah, agreed. I have more highlights in this book than I have in other books that I've been running campaigns with. There's so much here to work with, dear listener. I highly recommend, if you are into Nightbane and you do not have Book 2 Nightlands, go get it.
Go get it.
And then drop by our Discord and tell us what you think about it.
Absolutely. This is one where I really, really want to hear the community's opinions about.
Yeah.
Because I have run into people who do not like this book. And some of the points they brought up I consider valid, but I also don't feel like I can do them justice, so I didn't give them voice here. So stop by our Discord and give us your opinions. Whether you love this book, have issues with this book, tell us your thoughts on this book.
Yeah, please do. We'd love to hear from you. And okay, we are at an hour now. So thanks for listening, folks, and we will catch you next time.
Starships, magic, mystic martial arts, romance. All of these can be found in A Cloak of Blades by Isaac Scher. You might have heard my name before. I've done a lot of voiceover work for Breakfast Puppies, and I've recently released my first novel. It's available on Amazon as an ebook and paperback, and you can get it for free if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription. I do hope you'll support my work as you're supporting Breakfast Puppies, and it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Have a good one.
You've been listening to The Glitterbois, a Palladium Books fan podcast. Glitterbois, Rifts, the Megaverse, and all other such topics are the property of Kevin Siembieda and Palladium Books. Please buy all their stuff and help keep them in print and making more games. You can order directly at palladiumbooks.com, and their entire catalog is available digitally at Drive-Thru RPG as well. Our opening music is 8-Bit Bass and Lead by Furby Guy from freesound.org. This closing music is Caravana by Philip Gross, available at freemusicarchive.org. All sound effects used are self-made or acquired via Creative Commons Zero license. If you like what you have heard, find us on Twitter and Facebook as The Glitterbois. That's BOIS. And check us out online at breakfastpuppies.com/glitterboys. And also join us on the Breakfast Puppies Network Discord at breakfastpuppies.com/discord. And if you want to help us out, please spread the word and help us build a community. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time.